Okay, we are rolling.
All right. Hey, I'm Jonathan Hidenrite Jr., but everybody's called me Johnny my whole life, and this is NSEVEN. So, when telling my story, I always start by saying that I didn't necessarily grow up in a Christian home. I was raised, in the Bible Belt, so it's kind of the thing to do to just say you believe in God, but I didn't know anything about what Jesus really did for me. I didn't have any Bibles even in my home, so I'd never read on my own. But just growing up, I say that there was like a hole in my life where Jesus was supposed to be, but I didn't know that's where he was supposed to be. Like, I didn't know that there was a hole even there. And so growing up, oftentimes, like, people fill that hole in their lives where Jesus is supposed to be with different stuff. For me, growing up, that was just like status and popularity. Like, I really felt like I needed to fit in. I idolized like the people at my school that I thought were popular, and I was like, I have to be like them. I have to fit in. I have to make people laugh. I have to have a girlfriend, things like that. And so, as you can imagine, having this idea of what was important in all the wrong places just wasn't good for me, like, mentally. And I didn't even know that, but obviously growing up, that was my priority, and until my junior year, that's the way it was. I was just so focused on that. And some days I'd have highs where I felt like I made everybody laugh and I had a good day, and then some days I'd have really lows where I felt like, man, like, somebody made fun of me today, or today I just didn't feel as popular. That girl didn't text me back, and it was like the end of the world. And so my junior year, things started to change, though, when one day in a chemistry class, there was 4 of us at a table, and we agreed, hey, before we all go to lunch, we're all going to clean up together. We had like beakers and all this crazy stuff out, and I was just thinking, like, all right, surely my group, when we make this agreement, we're all going to stay here and clean up together. But time for lunch comes, everybody leaves me behind. And so I'm the only one left in the class because all the other groups, they made sure to clean up together, but I'm one man cleaning up. The teacher even left the room. And so I'm alone in this room, and that's when I started to have some of my like lowest thoughts, was in this one specific moment where I thought, man, like, I try to be so nice. I tell everybody good morning. I send people like texts and check on them, and I was like, I'm trying to be like the nicest person I can, but I was like, is this just what I'm supposed to be? I'm never going to have any real value. I'm always going to be the guy that gets left behind. And so in this moment, I'm like really down on myself, and it's been rough. But as I go to leave the room, this girl who was at our table originally is running back down the hallway, like sprinting back for me. And I was like, man, like, this is so cool, like crazy. Like, someone found value in me. Someone turned away from popularity and stuff to come back for me. And so that was like really deep for me. Like, that really hit. And so I later let her know like how important it was and how much she had kind of like lifted my spirits that day. And that kind of like went to the first real friendship I had, real Christian friendship I had, because I started talking to her more about the way I had felt and how I'd been down. And she really just started showing me like just genuine kindness and love. And one day I finally asked her, I was like, hey, how do you do it? Like, this person I felt like had good grades, they played sports, they got along with everybody, they were just always smiling, and they had everything like you could really want, like everything that I would want. But they just always seemed happy, like they didn't feel fazed by the stuff that I felt like fazed me. And they said, well, I'm following this guy named Jesus. And she started telling me about it, and then she invited me to church. We started going, and it was just awesome the way that she served me by taking me to church, because she was a little bit older, like for a few months, and just showed me Jesus. And so as I started going to church, I was like, man, this Jesus stuff is really cool, but I don't know anything about it. It doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. And then she said, well, if you want to know more about Jesus, you need to read the Bible on your own. And I was like, okay, cool, but I hate reading. I haven't read a real book since like 6th grade at this point. But I was like, I guess I'll try it. So I go to reading. She tells me to start reading in Matthew. And I read Matthew 1. I read Matthew 2. I read Matthew 3. Read Matthew 4, and I couldn't put it down. And so finally I got to Matthew 5. And I read what are called the Beatitudes, just a very churchy word for the beginning of the Sermon on the Mount. But I read these verses, and this is what kind of changed my life. Matthew chapter 5, starting in verse 3, Jesus says, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." And so I read this, and in my life, in that moment, just alone in my room reading this, I expected Jesus to say something like, blessed are the people who fit in, blessed are those who have a lot of money, the people who get good grades, blessed are the people who have boyfriends or girlfriends, blessed are the people that have all the coolest clothes, blessed are the people whose parents get along, blessed are the people who come from a nice home, who have a nice house, just things like that. And Jesus was saying kind of the opposite. Jesus took everything that I knew about the world, everything I thought was important, and he said, I'm flipping this upside down. And so this was the first moment that in my life I really felt like the presence of Jesus, and he was just saying like, hey, this is where I've wanted you this whole time. Like, this is where I want you. Like, come join me, Johnny. This is it. And so I was all in. He brought me home, and I would say after about 5 months of me going to church for the first time is when I was baptized. And since then, it's just been a journey of God consistently telling me like, hey, I'm going to get you from point A to point B. And it's like, okay, cool. But the middle part is tough. Like, all right, God, I don't know how you're going to get me to point B. And my life has just been a journey of perspective to see, okay, God, you've gotten me from point A to point B so many times that now when you give me this new thing and you're like, hey, I'm going to get you to point B, I'm like, all right, God, well, I have to trust you even though I don't know how that's going to happen at all. And so I'll kind of end by saying this. One of my first struggles as a Christian was just, why did I have to wait 16 years to find God? Like, if he's so nice. And I struggled with like just the why. And it wasn't until about a year into my faith, or maybe a year and a half or so into my faith, when I kind of started to think about how I was getting called into ministry. And I feel like the reason I went 16 years without Jesus is because now I can go and talk to my youth students or kids ministry and talk to them from a perspective of like, hey, I know what it's like to not have Jesus. I know what it's like to be so focused on these things and fitting in and just thinking that church sounds boring and things like that. Like, I come from this worldly perspective to where I promise you, like, having seen both worlds, the Jesus side is better. And so I feel like because I have this perspective that not every Christian can say they have, it's like, this is what God's called me to do. And so now I use that for his ministry. And so my life verse is John 13:7, and it's Jesus talking to the disciples. And he says, for you do not know now what I am doing, later you will understand. And my whole life has been kind of that moment, just recreated over and over, where I say, okay, God, why are you doing this? Or why did you do this? But I've been blessed enough with perspective to be able to say, okay, God, I feel like I understand why you're doing this now. Or maybe in a moment I can say, God, I don't know why you're doing this in the moment. Like, this is terrible, or this is confusing, God. I'm lost. You closed this door that I thought I was going to be able to open. But I can say, okay, God, you've gotten me this far so many times. I know at some point I'll understand. And so I hope that encourages somebody today. Just knowing that, yes, it can be tough. Yes, it can be hard. But if God told you you're going to go to point B, you will get to point B. Like, whatever God has in store for you is much better than anything you could ever plan for. And the more we learn to trust that, I think just the easier our lives get.